one signature, one choice, and my life would never be the same. I looked at the check in front of me. The amount was absurd, more than I had ever seen in my life, enough to erase my struggles in an instant. My hands trembled, not from excitement, but from something deeper. Disgust. Nathaniel Pierce sat across from me, watching. He was patient, confident, like a man who had never heard the word no in his life. "You hesitate," he said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "That tells me you are thinking about it." I met his gaze, refusing to look at the check again. "I am not for sale." A smirk played on his lips. "Everything has a price. Then you have never met someone like me." Silence stretched between us. His associates exchanged glances, sensing something shift. I had not just rejected him, I had humiliated him. Nathaniel's smirk did not fade, but his eyes darkened. "You will regret this." It was not a threat, it was a promise. I turned on my heel and walked away. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my head high. I had one hand high. That thought lasted less than a day. The next morning, my shift at the diner was gone. The manager avoided my eyes, mumbling something about budget cuts. My name had disappeared from the schedule. I swallowed hard and forced a smile. "That is fine. I will find something else." Except I did not. Every job I applied for turned me away before I could even finish an interview. My landlord, who had always been lenient, suddenly demanded triple the rent, due immediately. Coincidences do not happen like this. I knew exactly who was behind it. Nathaniel Pierce was not a man who took rejection lightly. He had not gotten angry. He had not raised his voice. He had smiled. And now he was watching as my world collapsed piece by piece. But I was not going to break. I stormed into his office, past a receptionist who barely had time to protest. Nathaniel was waiting, not surprised, not irritated, waiting. I slammed my hands onto his desk. "Call it off." His brows lifted in mock confusion. "Call what off?" "You know exactly what." Nathaniel sighed, standing up with unhurried ease. "You assume I am behind your misfortunes. That is an interesting theory." I clenched my fists. "You have made your point. Now stop." He leaned in just enough to make my pulse spike. "Or what?" Heat crawled up my neck, but I refused to flinch. He enjoyed this, seeing me struggle, watching me fight against something I could not touch. Then he slid another check across the desk. This time, the number was even higher. "Try again, Monroe. This time say yes." My stomach twisted, but my voice stayed steady. "No." His gaze flickered to my hands. They were shaking. His smirk returned, but there was something else beneath it. Interest. "You are stubborn," he murmured. "That is what makes this fun." I turned to leave. Then he said something I never expected, and just like that, the game changed. The diner doors opened at sunrise, and I was always there, refilling coffee cups, serving meals, and dreaming of a life I knew I would never have. The scent of burnt toast and fresh coffee filled the air, masking the exhaustion that weighed heavy on my shoulders. No one noticed the waitress who worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. My apartment was barely livable, the walls too thin, the bills piling higher than my paycheck. No matter how hard I worked, nothing ever changed. The ceiling leaked when it rained, the heat barely worked, and every morning I reminded myself that I had no choice but to endure it. The diner had seen its fair share of faces, but when he walked in, the entire room fell silent. Even the air felt heavier. He did not belong here. His presence did not just demand attention, it commanded it. Conversations hushed, eyes darted toward him, but no one dared to stare for too long. Nathaniel Pierce was not just rich, he was power itself. His name was printed across the tallest skyscrapers, whispered in corporate boardrooms, feared in courtrooms. He was a man who bought and sold anything he wanted, and when he looked at me, I knew he was used to getting exactly that. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Name your price." For a second, I thought I misheard him. Then I saw the way he smirked, like he was waiting for me to break. The room felt too small, too suffocating. My grip tightened around the tray in my hands, but I did not let my voice waver. I am not for sale. His smirk widened, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. The laughter of his colleagues filled the space between us. They watched me like I was some kind of entertainment, waiting to see if I would change my mind, waiting for me to realize the mistake I had made. But I stood my ground. His expression never changed. "You will regret this," he murmured. And somehow, that was more terrifying than if he had been angry. I turned my back on him, believing I had walked away victorious. I had no idea I had just started a war. The next morning, my name disappeared from the diner schedule. My shits were gone, erased without explanation. I tried to fight it, but the manager refused to meet my eyes. Then, my landlord raised my rent without warning. Every job I applied for turned me away before I even finished the interview. Doors that had been hard to open before were now completely locked. Someone was pulling the strings, and I knew exactly who it was. I stormed into his office, the one that overlooked the city like a king surveying his kingdom. Security tried to stop me, but his voice cut through the room. "Let her in." He was waiting, and his smile told me this was exactly where he wanted me. I did not sit. "Fix it." He leaned back, lacing his fingers together as if he had all the time in the world. "Fix what?" "My job. My home. You did this." He tilted his head slightly, feigning innocence. "You are mistaken. The world is simply an unfair place." "But..." He let the silence stretch, watching me. "I can help you." My heart pounded. I already knew what was coming. "Try it again, Monroe. This time say yes." "No." My voice was steady, but my hands, they were shaking. Then he said something I never expected. And just like that, the game changed. His words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning I could not yet grasp. But the look in his eyes told me one thing: he was not finished. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Walk out that door, and you will learn just how much power I have." I did not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But the moment I stepped outside, I felt it. His warning was not just words. That night, I found an eviction notice on my door. No warning, no second chances. I had 24 hours to leave. I called every contact I had, every place that might have a room for rent. Every call ended the same way. "We are sorry. We cannot take you in." It was him. He was shutting every door before I even knocked. I stood in the middle of my empty apartment, surrounded by packed boxes with nowhere to take them. My pride told me to fight. My reality told me I had already lost. By morning, I had two choices: run or go back to him. And I was not ready to run just yet. When I walked back into his office, I expected triumph in his eyes. Instead, there was something worse: satisfaction. "You are back sooner than I thought," he said, his voice calm, measured. I hated that he was right, hated that he had planned this from the moment I said no. But I would not give him what he wanted. "I need time," I said. "I need a place to stay." He did not hesitate. "Then stay with me." I felt my breath hitch, but I masked it with a scoff. "And what price comes with that?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "No price. Just my company." Lies, but I had no other choice. That night, I stepped into his world, and I realized just how little I knew about men like him. His house was not a house, it was an empire, a fortress of glass and steel that overlooked the city he ruled. The air smelled expensive, the silence stretched too long, and every hallway felt like it was leading me deeper into something I would not escape. "You can sleep here," he said, opening the door to a guest room larger than my entire apartment. I crossed my arms. "And you expect me to just stay here? Like a pet?" His smirk returned. "Like a guest." I did not believe him, but at that moment, I did not have the luxury of trust. Days passed, then a week. He did not ask anything of me, but he watched. every time I walked into a room, his eyes were already there, studying me like I was a puzzle he could not yet solve. I expected control. I expected manipulation. I did not expect curiosity. Then came the night that changed everything. I was alone in the grand library, running my fingers over the gold-edged spines of books I would never afford. The storm outside rattled the windows, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe. Then the lights flickered, and the door creaked open. I turned, expecting a housekeeper, a staff member, anyone but him. Yet there he was, leaning against the doorway, eyes unreadable. "You cannot sleep," he said. It was not a question. I exhaled. "Neither can you." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. A dangerous moment, a shift in the game. And I knew then he was not just playing. Neither was I. I believed I was walking away with my dignity. The truth? I had stepped into a war I did not even know had begun. That night, as I left the diner, I felt victorious. I had looked the billionaire in the eyes and refused to play his game. I told myself I had won. But power is not just about money. It is about control. And Nathaniel Pierce, he controlled everything. The next morning, I walked into the diner as usual. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, the clatter of plates, the murmurs of early customers. But something was wrong. My name was not on the schedule. I frowned, scanning the board again. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it was a mistake. "Hey, Marty," I called out to my manager. "I think there is a mix-up. My shifts are missing." He would not meet my eyes. "We had to make some cuts," he mumbled, running a hand through his thinning hair. Something about the way he avoided looking at me made my stomach twist. "Marty, come on. I have worked here for years. You are really cutting me." He sighed, his fingers tightening around his clipboard. "It was not my decision, Faye. Look, I am sorry." I stepped back. The room felt smaller, the air tighter. Nathaniel. This was him. I barely made it home before my phone buzzed. "Miss Monroe, your rent has increased. The new amount is effective immediately." I stared at the message, my pulse pounding. Yesterday, my landlord smiled at me. Today, he wanted 3 times the amount. I rushed downstairs to his office. "Mr. Daniels, this has to be a mistake. You cannot just triple my rent overnight." He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "It is the market, Faye. Prices change." Lies. He had owned this building for 20 years. He never raised rent on a whim. I swallowed hard. This is about Nathaniel Pierce, is it not? His silence was my answer. I spent the next week applying for jobs. 1 rejection. 2, 5. At first, it seemed like bad luck, but then I noticed the pattern. Every interview ended the same way. "Sorry, the position has been filled. Unfortunately, we are looking for someone with different experience. I appreciate your time, but we have decided to move in another direction." No one even let me finish my sentences. By the 10th rejection, the truth settled over me like a cold shadow. This was not bad luck. I sat on my bed, staring at the eviction notice, my empty fridge, the pile of unpaid bills. This was not a coincidence. It was calculated, precise. Nathaniel was not just cutting off my income. He was watching me drown, and he was waiting for me to break. I refused to break. I threw on my best coat, lifted my chin, and marched into the towering headquarters of Pierce Enterprises. The marble floors, the gleaming glass walls, it was a different world, a kingdom built on wealth and power. And at the center of it sat a man who had decided to destroy me. "Do you have an appointment, miss?" The receptionist barely glanced at me. "I do not need one." Security stepped forward, but before they could touch me, a voice cut through the air. "Let her in, Nathaniel." I turned and met his gaze. He was waiting for me. I stepped into his office, the door clicking shut behind me. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, amusement flickering in his eyes. "I warned you," he said smoothly. "Did I not?" My hands curled into fists. "You ruined my life." He tilted his head, pretending to think. No, Faye, you did that the moment you told me no. I exhaled sharply, forcing my voice to stay steady. What do you want? A slow smirk curved his lips. He reached into his desk, pulled out a contract, and slid it across the polished surface. Double the price. 1 week. His voice was silk and steel. You still think you can afford to say no? My stomach twisted. It was not about the money anymore. It was about proving a point. I could have taken the deal, walked away from this nightmare. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw it. This was not about me. It was about power. And I would rather lose everything than let him win. I pushed the contract back. No, he did not argue. He did not beg. He just smiled, a slow, knowing smirk. And in that moment, I realized he was far from finished. No one had ever told Nathaniel Pierce no. No one had ever walked away. But I did. And that was the beginning of something I could not yet understand. He had taken my job, my home, my sense of security. And yet, I refused to break. I worked in hidden corners of the city, places where his power did not stretch. I cleaned floors, washed dishes, counted every coin just to survive. I thought I had found a way to exist beyond his reach, until I realized I was never beyond his reach, because he was watching. Nathaniel Pierce never lost. And he was not about to let me be the first exception. I felt his presence before I saw him. That night, I was working at a 5-star hotel, wiping down glass windows when I caught the reflection of a man sitting in the lounge. A glass in his hand, a knowing smirk on his lips. Nathaniel. Our eyes met through the reflection. I turned back to my work, pretending he was not there. But I felt his gaze, calm, patient, unshaken, like a man waiting for a storm he had already predicted, like a man who had already won. The next morning, the manager called me into his office. I am sorry, Faye. We have to let you go. I sat frozen, my fingers curling into fists. Why? The manager would not meet my eyes. Corporate decision. Someone made a call. I did not need to ask who. I walked out with my head high, but inside, I was shaking. How much farther would he go? How long before he destroyed every path I tried to take? He was waiting for me to crawl back. I refused to give him that satisfaction. So I found another way. Cash jobs, night shifts, anything to survive. I would not give him the pleasure of seeing me fall. But every time I thought I had escaped his shadow, he reminded me that I had not. It happened at a gala. I had taken a catering job, blending into the crowd of black ties and evening gowns, my tray balancing glasses of champagne, until I felt a shift in the air. And then I saw him, Nathaniel Pierce. Tall, untouchable, powerful. He was speaking to people who worshipped his wealth, his control. But when our eyes met across the room, I saw something I had never seen before. Not amusement, not cruelty, curiosity. I had humiliated him once. Now I was standing in his world, and he was waiting to see what I would do next. So I did nothing. I did not flinch. I did not break. I walked past him as if he was no one, and that was the moment everything changed. People hovered around him, hanging on to every word, but I did not. I served drinks, ignored his gaze, treated him as just another guest. And I felt his attention sharpen, because Nathaniel Pierce had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted him. I was the first to show him that I did not. And that made me dangerous. I saw it in his expression. This was no longer about power, no longer about control. This was about something else entirely. I had become the one thing he did not understand. And Nathaniel Pierce did not handle uncertainty well. Why did I stay in his mind? Why did I challenge him in ways no one else dared? I could feel the shift in him. This was not the game he had started playing. This was something different, something dangerous. Neither of us understood what had begun. But one thing was certain, neither of us could stop it now. And for the first time, Nathaniel Pierce was facing something he could not control. Me. She thought she had survived his worst. But this was something else. The night was quiet, too quiet. The city lights flickered in the distance as she slid into her car, exhausted from another long shift. The engine hummed to life, and for a moment, she let out a breath of relief. Then something was wrong. The brakes, they were not working. The headlights flickered, the wheel jerked under her grip. Panic surged through her chest. The streetlights blurred as the car veered toward an intersection. A truck's horn blared. She yanked the wheel, but it was useless. The car spun, tires screeching against the pavement. And then, impact. The door flew open. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders, pulling her from the wreck. She gasped for breath, her vision blurred. The scent of expensive cologne, the warmth of a firm grip, she knew who it was before she even looked up. Nathaniel. His face hovered inches from hers, his breathing uneven, his jaw clenched. What were you thinking? His voice was low, sharp, but there was something else beneath it, something unfamiliar. She shivered not from the cold, but from the way he was looking at her. Like she was something fragile, like he was afraid. He was furious. But at whom? At her? At himself? Or at the fear clawing inside him? His grip tightened on her arms, as if testing to make sure she was still there, still real. You could have died, he said, his voice quieter this time. She swallowed hard, her body trembling. Maybe that was the point, she whispered. His eyes darkened. Do not say that. For the first time she saw it. Not power, not arrogance. Something else, something he did not want her to see. The hospital was not an option. She knew better than to argue when he made the decision for her. Moments later, she found herself in his car, the leather seats cool against her skin. The silence between them stretched as the city disappeared behind them. She should have fought. She should have demanded to be let out. But for the first time, she did not. Maybe because, for the first time, she was afraid. The road twisted into darkness, leading them to a place she had never seen before. No skyscrapers, no glass offices, just a secluded estate hidden behind towering trees. The air was heavy with silence. This was not his world of power and control. This was something else. She stepped inside, her gaze flickering across the dimly lit space. Bookshelves, paintings, a grand piano covered in dust. No staff, no security, just him. Nathaniel Pierce, the billionaire who owned everything, yet lived in a house filled with ghosts. She sat on the edge of the couch, gripping the blanket draped over her shoulders. She was strong. She had survived worse. But fear had a way of finding the cracks. Her hands would not stop shaking. She felt his presence before she saw him. A glass of water appeared in front of her. She hesitated before taking it. Drink, he said. She did. And for the first time in a long time, she let someone take care of her, even if that someone was Nathaniel Pierce. He watched her in silence. Then he spoke. I was 6 years old when I realized money could fix everything. She frowned. This was not what she expected. Everything, she asked? A muscle in his jaw twitched. Everything, except peace. His voice was hollow, distant. He did not talk about his past. No one did. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the cracks were showing. She should have looked away. She should have thanked him and left. But she did not move. And neither did he. His gaze flickered to her lips. Hers lingered on his. The air felt heavier, charged with something neither of them were ready to name. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her breath hitched. This was not hate. This was not war. This was something else. Something dangerous. Neither moved. Neither spoke. But they both felt it. And for the first time, they were afraid. Not of each other, but of what this meant, of what came next. Because whatever this was, it had already begun, and there was no turning back. For the first time, he did not try to control the outcome. And that changed everything. Nathaniel stood by the window, his hands clenched at his sides. He had played this game before. Pushed, manipulated, always pulling the strings. But now there was nothing left to control. She was leaving. He turned just in time to see her hand on the door. A part of him wanted to stop her, to say something, anything, but instead he let her go. The cold air hit her as she stepped outside. This was what she wanted, what she fought for. But why did it feel like something was missing? Faye walked away without looking back, her heart pounding against her ribs. She should have felt relief. Instead, there was only an ache. Had she really won? Or had she just lost something she was not ready to name? The silence was deafening. Nathaniel sat in his office, staring at the contracts in front of him, deals worth millions, power at his fingertips. And yet, none of it mattered. He had spent years building his empire, ensuring that no one had the power to hurt him. So why did it feel like he had just lost the only thing that ever mattered? Days passed, then a week. Faye told herself she had moved on. She threw herself into work, trying to forget the way he looked at her that night. But the memory refused to fade. Something pulled at her, an unanswered question lingering in the back of her mind. Was she really ready to walk away? Or was she running from something she did not understand? She never planned on going back. But somehow, she found herself standing in front of his office. Nathaniel looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You came back," he said. She folded her arms. "I came for answers." His jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked away. Then, in a voice quieter than she had ever heard, he spoke. "I do not know how to love." The words settled between them, raw and unguarded. "But I want to try," he added, "if you will let me." Faye's chest tightened. She had every reason to leave, every reason to doubt him. He had broken her trust once. Could she believe him now? Her mind screamed no, but her heart whispered something else. This time, she was not a pawn in his game. If she stayed, it would be on her own terms. She took a slow breath, meeting his gaze. "If you want me to stay," she said, "you will have to earn it." A challenge, a warning. Nathaniel did not hesitate. "Then tell me where to start." And for the first time, it was not about power. It was about choice, about something real. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something neither of them had ever expected. Sometimes, a single decision can rewrite your entire future. Faye had nothing but her own resolve when she walked away from Nathaniel's offer. No guarantees, no promises, just faith that she had made the right choice. But would you have done the same? Would you have walked away from power, from security, from the easy way out? Or would you have taken the deal, not knowing what it would cost? One moment, one decision, and nothing was ever the same again. Strength is not always about standing your ground in a fight. Sometimes it is about knowing when to walk away. Faye did not have wealth or status, but she had something even more valuable, self-worth. She could have given in. She could have taken the easy way out. But true strength is quiet. It is in the choices we make when no one is watching. And in that moment, she proved that her value was never something that could be bought. She thought she was losing everything. Her job, her home, her sense of control. But in the end, she gained something priceless. Nathaniel had power over everything, except her. He had played the game to win, but was he the one who lost? Sometimes, the real victory is not about gaining more. It is about knowing when you already have enough. What if rejection is not the end of the story, but the beginning of something greater? Faye's no was not just a refusal. It was a declaration. It was saying yes to herself, yes to her dignity, yes to the belief that she deserved more than a bargain disguised as an opportunity. Have you ever turned down something that seemed too good to be true? Maybe that moment was not about loss, but about setting the stage for something better. Choices define us. Some lead to regret, some lead to transformation, and some change everything. Have you ever made a decision that altered the course of your life? A moment where one choice set off a chain reaction you never expected. Your story matters. Tell us, what was your moment? Leave a comment below. Some stories are just stories, and some stay with us forever. Faye's journey was not just about a billionaire's offer. It was about power, choices, and the courage to stand alone. If this story made you think, if it stirred something inside you, then stay with us. Because the best stories are the ones that make us see the world differently. Every life holds a story worth telling. Maybe yours is next. Subscribe because the next story might be yours.